The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his red tunic and checked his ceremonial sword one final time. At 32 years old, Marcus had served as a royal guard for 8 years, but today felt different. The air was thick with tension that seemed to hang over London like a heavy blanket. Marcus had grown up in a small town in Yorkshire, where his father worked in a steel mill and his mother taught at the local primary school. From a young age, Marcus showed exceptional physical abilities and an unwavering sense of duty. His teachers often remarked on his natural leadership qualities and his ability to remain calm under pressure. When he turned 18, Marcus joined the British Army, where he quickly distinguished himself during his service in Afghanistan. The transition from regular army to Royal Guard hadn't been easy. The selection process was grueling, testing not just physical strength but mental resilience and unwavering loyalty to the crown. Out of hundreds of applicants, only 12 were chosen that year, and Marcus was one of them. The training that followed was unlike anything he had experienced, combining traditional military discipline with the unique requirements of protecting the royal family. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches with broad shoulders and piercing blue eyes, Marcus possessed an intimidating presence that commanded respect. But beneath his stern exterior was a man driven by honor and duty. He took pride in his role, understanding that he was part of a tradition stretching back centuries. Every morning, he polished his boots until they gleamed, pressed his uniform to perfection, and prepared himself mentally for whatever challenges the day might bring. The palace had been unusually busy lately. Intelligence reports suggested increased terrorist activity in the city, and security measures had been heightened across all royal residences. Marcus and his fellow guards had been briefed on potential threats, from lone wolves to organized groups seeking to make political statements. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on their shoulders, knowing that any failure could have catastrophic consequences. As Marcus walked his assigned route along the palace perimeter, he noticed the increased police presence in the surrounding streets. Riot vans were positioned at strategic locations, their occupants ready to respond to any disturbance. The relationship between the royal guards and the Metropolitan Police had always been complex, with each force having distinct roles and responsibilities. While the guards focused on protecting the royal family and royal property, the police handled broader public order and security concerns. The morning passed quietly, with only the usual stream of tourists gathering outside the palace gates. Marcus maintained his stoic expression, ignoring the countless cameras pointed in his direction. He had learned long ago to tune out the noise and focus on his surroundings, constantly scanning for anything unusual or threatening. His training had taught him to trust his instincts, and today those instincts were telling him something was about to happen. Around midday, Marcus received word through his radio that a demonstration was forming several blocks away. What had started as a peaceful protest about government policies was beginning to grow more aggressive. The crowd was moving toward the palace district, and police units were being deployed to intercept and manage the situation. Marcus felt his pulse quicken slightly, though his outward appearance remained unchanged. The Royal Guard training had included extensive instruction in crowd control and threat assessment. Marcus understood that while their primary role was ceremonial and protective, they might sometimes find themselves in situations requiring immediate action. He had studied historical incidents where guards had been forced to act decisively to protect royal property or maintain order. Today might be one of those days. As the afternoon wore on, the sounds of the approaching demonstration grew louder. Chants and shouting could be heard echoing off the surrounding buildings, and the rhythmic beat of drums created an ominous soundtrack to the unfolding events. Marcus could see his fellow guards taking subtle defensive positions, their hands moving closer to their weapons while maintaining their ceremonial stance. The palace security team had activated their emergency protocols. Additional guards were deployed to key positions, and communication with police command was established to coordinate response efforts. Marcus found himself assigned to one of the most vulnerable positions near the main entrance, where tourists typically gathered, but which could also serve as a potential breach point for anyone seeking to access royal property. Through his earpiece, Marcus heard reports of the crowd's growing size and increasingly aggressive behavior. Shop windows had been broken several blocks away, and police were struggling to maintain control. The demonstration had attracted various groups with different agendas, creating a volatile mix of legitimate protesters and opportunistic troublemakers seeking to exploit the chaos. Marcus thought about his training and the oath he had taken when he became a royal guard. He had sworn to protect the crown and its property with his life if necessary. That oath wasn't just ceremonial words, it was a sacred commitment that defined who he was and what he stood for. As the noise grew closer and the tension in the air became palpable, Marcus prepared himself mentally for whatever was about to unfold. The radio crackled with updates from police units trying to establish a perimeter around the palace district. Marcus could hear the strain in the voices of the officers, knowing they were dealing with a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond their initial expectations. The peaceful demonstration had transformed into something far more dangerous, and everyone involved understood that the next few hours would test their training, their resolve, and their ability to maintain order in the face of chaos. Standing at his post, Marcus felt the weight of history on his shoulders. He was part of an institution that had protected British royalty for generations, and today he might be called upon to prove himself worthy of that heritage. The approaching crowd represented not just a security threat, but a test of everything he had learned and trained for throughout his military and guard service. The first sign of real trouble came when Marcus heard the sound of breaking glass echoing from the direction of the main street. Through his earpiece, frantic police reports painted a picture of escalating violence as the demonstration had split into multiple groups, some heading directly toward the palace while others spread throughout the surrounding area causing destruction. Marcus could see tourists beginning to scatter, their casual sightseeing suddenly interrupted by the approaching chaos. Parents grabbed their children and hurried away from the palace gates while others pulled out their phones to record what they sensed might become a significant incident. The normal peaceful atmosphere around the royal residence was rapidly dissolving into something far more sinister. From his position, Marcus watched as metropolitan police units began establishing roadblocks at the main intersections leading to the palace. Officers in riot gear deployed from their vehicles, their shields and batons ready for confrontation. The coordinated police response was impressive, but Marcus could tell from their body language and radio communications that they were struggling to contain the multiple groups of protesters who had scattered across the area. The crowd's chants had grown more aggressive, with voices calling for everything from political reform to the abolition of the monarchy itself. What concerned Marcus most was the diversity of the groups involved. Intelligence briefings had warned about the potential for different protest movements to merge during times of civil unrest, creating unpredictable and dangerous situations. Today appeared to be exactly that scenario unfolding in real time. Through gaps in the buildings, Marcus caught glimpses of smoke rising from several locations. Police reports confirmed that vehicles had been overturned and set ablaze, while shopfronts were being systematically damaged by groups of masked individuals who seemed more interested in destruction than political protest. The situation was evolving from a demonstration into a full-scale riot, and the palace was directly in its path. Marcus felt his training taking over as adrenaline began coursing through his system. Years of military service in combat zones had taught him to remain calm while mentally preparing for action. He ran through the protocols he had memorized for various threat scenarios, from individual attackers to large groups attempting to breach palace security. Today's situation didn't fit neatly into any single category, which made it potentially more dangerous. The Royal Guard's role in civil unrest was carefully defined but complex. While police handled public order, the guards were responsible for protecting royal property and could act decisively if that property was threatened. The legal authorities granted to royal guards in such situations were extensive, though rarely exercised. Marcus understood that any action he took would be scrutinized intensely, both by his superiors and by the media. Radio communications revealed that several police units were requesting backup as they faced increasingly violent confrontations. Bottles and stones were being thrown at officers, and there were reports of individuals carrying weapons ranging from knives to improvised clubs. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Marcus could sense that the established police perimeter might not hold. From his vantage point, Marcus observed 3 Riot police officers who had become separated from their main unit during the chaos. They were moving quickly along the street adjacent to the palace, apparently trying to reach a safer position or rejoin their colleagues. The officers appeared experienced and professional, their movements coordinated as they navigated through the increasingly dangerous environment. What Marcus didn't initially realize was that these 3 officers were being pursued by a larger group of rioters who had spotted them and were treating them as targets of opportunity. The crowd's mood had turned ugly, with some individuals clearly seeking confrontation with any representative of authority they could find. The isolated police officers represented exactly the kind of vulnerable target that could escalate the violence to a new level. The officers were heavily equipped with riot gear, including protective helmets, shields, and batons. Their training was extensive, and under normal circumstances, they would be more than capable of handling most threats. However, they were outnumbered and cut off from backup, making their situation increasingly precarious as the hostile crowd began closing in around them. Marcus watched as the 3 officers attempted to establish radio contact with their command center. But the chaos and electronic interference were making communication difficult. They were essentially on their own, trying to navigate through territory that had become increasingly hostile with each passing minute. The professional demeanor they maintained despite the circumstances impressed Marcus, who recognized fellow professionals doing their duty under extreme pressure. The crowd dynamics were shifting constantly as different groups merged and separated based on opportunities for destruction or confrontation. Marcus could see that the 3 police officers were unaware of just how dangerous their situation had become, as they couldn't see the full scope of the hostile crowd that was beginning to surround them from multiple directions. Palace security protocols required Marcus to maintain his position unless directly ordered otherwise, or unless royal property faced immediate threat. However, he could see that the situation was developing in a way that might soon force him to make critical decisions about when and how to act. The 3 officers were moving closer to the palace perimeter, potentially bringing the violence directly to the area Marcus was sworn to protect. The radio chatter revealed that police command was losing track of various units as the situation continued to fragment across multiple locations. Resources were stretched thin, and response times were increasing as available units were deployed to handle the most critical incidents. The 3 officers Marcus was observing were becoming increasingly isolated from any potential support. Marcus could hear the crowd growing louder and more aggressive as they sensed vulnerable targets. The psychology of mob behavior was something he had studied extensively during his training, understanding how individual rationality could quickly disappear when people became part of an angry crowd. The 3 officers were about to face exactly that phenomenon, and Marcus realized he might be the only person in position to help them if the situation deteriorated further. Standing at his post, Marcus felt the weight of multiple responsibilities. His primary duty was to protect royal property, but his training and personal code of honor also compelled him to assist fellow security personnel when possible. The next few minutes would test not just his physical abilities, but his judgment about when duty required him to act decisively in a rapidly evolving and dangerous situation. The situation reached a critical point when Marcus saw the 3 Riot police officers suddenly break into a run, their heavy equipment clanking as they moved with urgent purpose toward the palace gates. Behind them, a crowd of approximately 30 rioters had emerged from between buildings, shouting threats and hurling objects in their direction. The officers were no longer trying to maintain order. They were fleeing for their safety. Marcus immediately understood the tactical situation. The officers were being herded directly toward the palace perimeter, where his responsibility for protecting royal property would inevitably clash with the pursuing crowd. If the rioters followed the police onto palace grounds, Marcus would be legally obligated to act decisively to protect the crown's property, regardless of the officer's presence or safety. Through his earpiece, Marcus heard frantic radio calls, as police command tried to coordinate a response to help the isolated officers. However, all available units were engaged in their own confrontations across the riot zone, and backup was at least 10 minutes away. The three officers were completely on their own, with only Marcus and the palace gates standing between them and the increasingly violent crowd pursuing them. The lead officer, a sergeant with 20 years of experience, was carrying a damaged radio that sparked and crackled but provided no useful communication. His two colleagues, both constables in their early 30s, flanked him as they ran, their riot shields held ready for defensive action. All three men showed signs of the intense stress they had endured over the past hour, their uniforms torn and dirty from previous confrontations. Marcus could see that the officers were making a tactical error in their desperation. By running directly toward the palace, they were leading the hostile crowd to exactly the location where Marcus could not allow any breach of security. The irony wasn't lost on him that fellow law enforcement officers were inadvertently creating a situation that would force him to potentially act against them to fulfill his duties as a royal guard. The pursuing crowd had grown more organized and aggressive, with several individuals clearly acting as leaders to coordinate the chase. These weren't random protesters caught up in mob hysteria. They were people who understood how to exploit chaos for maximum impact. Marcus recognized the signs of individuals who had experience in street violence and knew how to manipulate crowd dynamics to their advantage. As the officers approached the palace gates, Marcus stepped forward from his ceremonial position, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. His movement was subtle but deliberate, positioning himself to intercept anyone who might attempt to breach the palace perimeter. The three officers saw him and seemed to recognize that they were approaching a line that might offer them protection, but they didn't understand the complexity of Marcus's position. The sergeant leading the fleeing officers made eye contact with Marcus, and in that moment, both men understood they were facing an unprecedented situation. Police and royal guards had worked together many times, but never under circumstances where their respective duties might come into direct conflict. The sergeant slowed his pace slightly, trying to assess whether the royal guard represented help or another obstacle to overcome. Marcus felt the weight of his training and his oath pulling him in different directions. Every instinct told him to help fellow law enforcement officers in distress, but his sworn duty required him to prevent any unauthorized access to royal property, regardless of who was involved. The approaching crowd showed no signs of stopping at the palace gates, meaning Marcus would soon face a situation requiring immediate and decisive action. The crowd behind the officers had begun throwing more dangerous projectiles, including pieces of broken concrete and metal objects scavenged from the riot zone. One constable stumbled as a thrown bottle struck his helmet, but his colleagues helped him maintain his footing as they continued their desperate flight toward what they hoped would be safety at the palace gates. Marcus quickly assessed his tactical options. The palace emergency protocols provided clear guidance for dealing with hostile crowds, but nothing specifically addressed the situation of police officers being pursued onto royal property. He would have to rely on his training, his judgment, and his ability to act decisively under pressure to navigate this unprecedented scenario. Through his earpiece, Marcus heard his superior officer requesting a status update on the situation at the main gates. Marcus responded tersely that he had 3 police officers approaching under pursuit by hostile crowd, approximately 30 individuals, requesting immediate guidance on rules of engagement. The response came back quickly. Protect royal property at all costs, assist police if possible without compromising security. The 3 officers reached the palace gates and attempted to position themselves defensively, using the iron railings and stone pillars as cover. However, their riot gear, while protective, also made them slow and cumbersome. They were exhausted from their escape and faced a crowd that showed no signs of backing down, despite the presence of a royal guard and the symbolic significance of the palace location. Marcus could see that the pursuing crowd was beginning to organize for a coordinated assault on the officer's position. Several individuals were communicating through hand signals and positioning themselves to attack from multiple angles. The situation was about to explode into violence that would occur directly on the boundary between public space and royal property. The sergeant among the officers attempted to establish a defensive perimeter with his 2 colleagues, but their position was tactically poor. They were trapped against the palace gates with limited room to maneuver and no backup support available. Their riot shields and batons would provide some protection, but they were severely outnumbered and facing a crowd that had already demonstrated its willingness to use violence. Marcus realized that the next 60 seconds would determine the outcome of this confrontation. The crowd was close enough that he could see individual faces, many of them twisted with anger and excitement at the prospect of overwhelming the isolated police officers. Some individuals carried improvised weapons, while others seemed intoxicated by the chaos and violence they had already participated in during the riot. Standing at the threshold between his ceremonial role and potential combat action, Marcus felt his military training taking complete control of his thoughts and reactions. Years of experience in dangerous situations had taught him to remain calm while preparing for explosive action. The time for hesitation was over. The situation demanded decisive intervention, and Marcus was the only person in position to provide it. The moment of confrontation arrived when the crowd surged forward, no longer content to simply chase but determined to overwhelm the three trapped officers. Marcus watched as approximately 15 rioters broke away from the main group and charged directly at the police position near the palace gates. The officers raised their shields and prepared for impact, but Marcus could see they would be quickly overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers. In that split second, Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his career. Abandoning his ceremonial post, he moved with the fluid precision of a trained combat veteran, stepping directly into the path of the charging crowd. His presence immediately changed the dynamics of the confrontation, as the rioters suddenly faced not just three exhausted police officers, but a royal guard whose reputation and capabilities were legendary among London's security forces. Marcus's first action was to position himself between the crowd and the officers, creating a defensive barrier that bought precious seconds for everyone to reassess the situation. His ceremonial uniform and bearing commanded immediate attention, and several rioters hesitated, unsure how to respond to this unexpected development. The Royal Guard's presence elevated the confrontation from a street riot to a potential attack on the crown itself. The lead rioter, a heavily built man in his 40s with facial tattoos and obvious experience in street violence, didn't hesitate like his companions. He swung a metal pipe directly at Marcus's head with enough force to cause serious injury or death. Marcus's reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Years of combat training took over as he ducked under the swing, grabbed the attacker's wrist, and used the man's own momentum to send him crashing into two other rioters behind him. The crowd's charge faltered as Marcus continued moving with surgical precision through their ranks. His actions weren't random violence but calculated strikes designed to neutralize threats while minimizing overall harm. Each movement served multiple purposes: disabling attackers, protecting the officers, and demonstrating the futility of continuing the assault against someone with his level of training and experience. A second attacker lunged forward with a broken bottle, aiming for Marcus's face. The Royal Guard sidestepped the attack and delivered a precise strike to the man's solar plexus, dropping him instantly without causing permanent injury. Marcus's control was remarkable. Despite the chaos and immediate danger, he maintained enough discipline to use only the minimum force necessary to neutralize each threat. The three police officers watched in amazement as Marcus systematically dismantled the attacking crowd. His movements were economical and purposeful, wasting no energy on dramatic flourishes, but focusing entirely on effectiveness. Within seconds, half a dozen rioters were on the ground, nursing injuries that would prevent them from continuing their attack, but wouldn't require hospitalization. The crowd's psychology shifted dramatically as they realized they weren't facing a ceremonial figure, but a genuine warrior. The confident aggression that had driven their charge evaporated, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Several rioters began backing away, no longer eager to test themselves against someone who had just demonstrated superior fighting skills. Marcus seized the psychological momentum, stepping forward and addressing the remaining crowd with a voice that carried absolute authority. "This is royal property," he declared, his words cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You will disperse immediately, or you will be arrested." His tone wasn't threatening or emotional. It was simply stating facts that everyone present needed to understand. The sergeant among the police officers attempted to assist Marcus by raising his baton and moving forward, but Marcus gestured for him to remain in position. The Royal Guard understood that this was a moment requiring individual action rather than group tactics. Adding the exhausted and equipment-heavy officers to the confrontation would only complicate the situation and potentially provide the crowd with additional targets. 3 more rioters attempted a coordinated attack from different angles, apparently, hoping to overwhelm Marcus through sheer numbers. Their strategy might have worked against a normal opponent, but Marcus had trained extensively in multi-opponent combat scenarios. He moved like a dancer, flowing between his attackers and using their own aggression against them. Within moments, all 3 were disabled and no longer posed a threat. The remaining crowd began fragmenting as individuals made their own decisions about whether to continue the confrontation. The leaders who had organized the charge were either on the ground or backing away, leaving the others without clear direction. The mob psychology that had driven their initial aggression was rapidly dissolving in the face of Marcus's demonstration of superior capability. Marcus could hear police sirens approaching in the distance, indicating that backup was finally en route. However, he knew the situation needed to be resolved immediately rather than waiting for reinforcements. The longer the confrontation continued, the greater the chance that more rioters would arrive, or that the situation would escalate beyond anyone's ability to control. One rioter, younger than the others and apparently intoxicated, made a final desperate attempt to reach the police officers by circling around Marcus's position. The Royal Guard anticipated the move and intercepted the attacker with a technique that looked almost effortless, but left the young man sprawled unconscious on the pavement. The precision of the strike demonstrated years of training in hand-to-hand combat. The demonstration of Marcus's capabilities had a profound effect on the remaining crowd. Word spread quickly through their ranks that they were facing someone far beyond their ability to handle. The confident aggression that had driven them to chase the police officers evaporated, replaced by a desire to escape, before they too became victims of the Royal Guard's superior training. Marcus maintained his defensive position, ready for additional attacks, but sensing that the immediate threat was dissipating. His breathing remained controlled despite the intense physical activity, and his uniform, while slightly disheveled, still maintained its dignity and authority. The transformation from ceremonial figure to combat operative and back again had taken less than 30 seconds. The 3 police officers remained in their defensive positions, but Marcus could see relief beginning to replace the desperate tension they had shown moments earlier. They were professional enough to recognize exceptional skill when they saw it, and they understood that Marcus had just saved them from what could have been a career-ending or life-threatening situation. As the crowd continued to disperse, Marcus heard his radio crackling with urgent communications from Palace Security and Police Command. Both organizations were trying to understand what had happened and coordinate an appropriate response. Marcus knew that his actions would be scrutinized intensely, but he felt confident that he had acted appropriately given the circumstances. The aftermath of the confrontation unfolded rapidly as police backup finally arrived on the scene. 3 riot vans and 2 patrol cars converged on the palace gates, their sirens wailing as officers in full tactical gear deployed to secure the area. Marcus stepped back to allow the newly arrived police to take control of the situation, but his actions had already fundamentally changed the dynamic of the entire incident. The 3 officers Marcus had protected were visibly shaken, but unharmed. Sergeant Davies, the senior officer among them, approached Marcus with obvious gratitude and professional respect. "I've never seen anything like that," he said, extending his hand. "You saved our lives out there." Marcus accepted the handshake, with characteristic modesty, simply stating, "We're all on the same side, Sergeant." The scattered rioters who had been disabled during Marcus's intervention were now being arrested and given medical attention as needed. None had suffered serious injuries, a testament to Marcus's precise control during the confrontation. The unconscious young man was beginning to stir, and paramedics were checking him for concussion while police prepared to transport him for processing. Word of the incident spread quickly through both police and palace security channels. Within minutes, Marcus found himself surrounded by superior officers from both organizations, all seeking to understand exactly what had happened and how a ceremonial royal guard had single-handedly neutralized a crowd of violent rioters. The questions came rapidly, but Marcus answered each one with professional precision. Commander Sarah Mitchell from Palace Security arrived within 20 minutes, having been briefed on the incident during her journey. She was a former military officer herself and immediately recognized the quality of Marcus's actions. "Sergeant Thompson," she said formally, "your intervention was exemplary. You protected both royal property and fellow officers while showing remarkable restraint in your use of force." The media attention began almost immediately. News crews had been covering the riots throughout the city, and word of a royal guard's dramatic intervention quickly spread through their networks. Camera crews arrived at the palace gates, eager to capture footage of the aftermath and interview anyone willing to speak about what had transpired. Marcus found himself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight. As a royal guard, he was accustomed to public attention during ceremonial duties, but this was entirely different. Reporters shouted questions about his background, his training, and his thoughts on the confrontation. Following protocol, Marcus referred all media inquiries to his superior officers and maintained his professional demeanor, despite the chaos surrounding him. The 3 police officers Marcus had protected became instant celebrities within their own organization. Constable Williams, the youngest of the 3, later told colleagues, "It was like watching a movie. One moment we thought we were done for, and the next this royal guard just dismantled the entire crowd like they were children. I've never seen anything like it in 15 years of policing." Video footage of the incident began appearing on social media within hours. Several witnesses had recorded portions of the confrontation on their phones, and the images of Marcus systematically neutralizing the attacking rioters went viral almost immediately. The footage showed his calm professionalism and precise actions, generating widespread public admiration for both his skill and his restraint. Palace officials worked quickly to manage the public relations aspects of the incident. While they were proud of Marcus's actions, they also needed to maintain the careful balance between the royal guard's ceremonial role and their security responsibilities. Official statements praised Marcus's professionalism while emphasizing that such interventions were rare exceptions to their normal duties. The investigation that followed was thorough and comprehensive. Marcus was interviewed multiple times by both palace security and police internal affairs investigators. Every aspect of his actions was scrutinized, from his decision to leave his post to his use of force against the rioters. The conclusion was unanimous. Marcus had acted appropriately and professionally throughout the incident. The rioters who had been arrested faced serious charges, including assault on police officers and attempting to breach royal property. The legal consequences of their actions were severe, and several received significant prison sentences. The incident served as a powerful deterrent to others who might consider similar attacks on law enforcement or royal property. Marcus's actions had broader implications for security protocols around royal properties. His demonstration of individual capability led to enhanced training programs for all royal guards, emphasizing both combat skills and judgment in complex situations. The incident became a case study in security training programs worldwide. The professional relationship between police and royal guards was strengthened by the incident. Sergeant Davies and his colleagues became regular visitors to the palace, developing friendships with Marcus and other guards that enhanced cooperation between the two forces. The mutual respect generated by the incident created lasting benefits for security coordination in London. Marcus received several commendations for his actions, including recognition from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner and a personal letter of thanks from senior royal household officials. However, he remained characteristically modest about his role, always emphasizing that he had simply done his duty as he understood it. The incident also had personal costs for Marcus. The media attention was intense and persistent, with reporters attempting to interview his family and friends in Yorkshire. His parents were proud but worried about their son's safety, knowing that his actions had made him a target for anyone seeking revenge against the authorities. 6 months after the incident, Marcus was promoted to the rank of senior sergeant within the Royal Guard, recognition of both his exceptional performance during the riot and his continued dedication to duty. The promotion came with increased responsibilities, and the opportunity to train new guards in the combat skills that had proved so valuable during the confrontation. The three police officers continued their careers with enhanced reputations within the Metropolitan Police. All three received commendations for their courage under fire and their professional conduct during the incident. Sergeant Davies was later promoted to inspector, with his experience during the riot cited as evidence of his leadership capabilities under pressure. The incident became part of Royal Guard legend, told and retold in training sessions and informal gatherings. New recruits learned about Marcus's actions as an example of how traditional duties and modern security requirements could be balanced effectively. The story served as both inspiration and instruction for future guards facing their own challenges. 2 years after the incident, Marcus Thompson found himself standing in the same courtyard where his extraordinary day had begun. But everything had changed. The morning sun cast familiar shadows across the palace grounds, but Marcus now wore the insignia of a senior sergeant and carried responsibilities that extended far beyond his original ceremonial duties. The ripple effects of that 30-second confrontation had transformed not only Marcus's career, but the entire approach to royal security. Training programs had been revolutionized, incorporating the lessons learned from his demonstration of individual capability under extreme pressure. New recruits now underwent intensive combat training alongside their ceremonial preparation, ensuring they could handle both traditional duties and modern security challenges. Marcus had become something of a legend within security circles, but the attention hadn't changed his fundamental character. He remained the same quiet, dedicated professional who had grown up in Yorkshire with simple values of duty and service. The fame that followed his actions was more burden than blessing, as he preferred the anonymity that had previously allowed him to focus entirely on his responsibilities. The media attention had eventually subsided, but Marcus's actions continued to influence security protocols worldwide. Delegations from other countries' protective services visited the palace to learn about the training methods that had produced such remarkable individual capability. Marcus often found himself instructing these visitors, sharing the techniques and mindset that had enabled him to act so decisively under pressure. The three police officers Marcus had protected maintained regular contact with him, their shared experience creating bonds that transcended organizational boundaries. Sergeant Davies, now Inspector Davies, often spoke about that day as the most terrifying and inspiring experience of his career. The mutual respect between police and royal guards that grew from the incident continued to enhance security cooperation. Throughout London, Marcus's family had initially struggled with the sudden fame that followed the incident. His parents in Yorkshire found reporters camping outside their home for weeks, seeking insights into the background of the man who had become a national hero overnight. The attention eventually faded, but it left them with a deeper understanding of the risks and responsibilities their son carried in his chosen profession. The personal cost of Marcus's actions extended beyond media attention. Several individuals connected to the arrested rioters had made threats against him, requiring enhanced security measures for his protection. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his success in protecting others had made him a target requiring protection himself. He accepted these restrictions with characteristic stoicism, understanding them as necessary consequences of his choices. The incident had also affected Marcus's relationships within the Royal Guard. While his colleagues respected his actions, some struggled with the attention he received and the changes his success had brought to their shared duties. Marcus worked carefully to maintain unit cohesion, always emphasizing that his actions reflected the training and support of the entire organization, rather than individual heroism. Professional opportunities beyond the Royal Guard began presenting themselves to Marcus. Private security firms offered lucrative contracts, military units sought his expertise, and government agencies expressed interest in his capabilities. However, Marcus consistently declined these opportunities, maintaining his commitment to the oath he had taken as a Royal Guard years earlier. The young man who had been knocked unconscious during the confrontation eventually wrote to Marcus from prison, apologizing for his actions and expressing gratitude that Marcus had shown restraint rather than causing permanent injury. The letter was one of several Marcus received from individuals who had been involved in the riot, many expressing regret for their participation and admiration for his professional conduct. Marcus's approach to training new Royal Guards emphasized the importance of judgment alongside physical capability. He taught recruits that true strength lay not in the ability to use force, but in knowing when and how to apply it appropriately. His instruction sessions became legendary for their intensity and their focus on maintaining honor while facing extreme challenges. The palace courtyard where Marcus continued to serve daily was now equipped with enhanced security features inspired by the lessons learned from the riot. However, the most significant change wasn't technological, but cultural. The Royal Guard had evolved from a primarily ceremonial force to a unit capable of handling modern security threats while maintaining their traditional dignity and protocols. Tourists who visited the palace often asked their guides about the Royal Guard who had single-handedly stopped a riot. Marcus would sometimes overhear these conversations during his duties, but his expression never changed from the stoic professionalism that had defined his service long before he became famous. To him, that day represented nothing more than doing his job under unusual circumstances. The academic study of the incident continued years later, with security experts analyzing every aspect of Marcus's decision-making and actions. Military academies incorporated the confrontation into their curricula as an example of individual initiative and professional restraint under extreme pressure. On quiet mornings when Marcus walked his familiar route around the palace grounds, he sometimes reflected on how drastically his life had changed from those 30 seconds of action. The weight of expectation now followed him everywhere, with colleagues, superiors, and the public all watching to see if he could maintain the standards he had set during that crucial moment. The pressure was immense, but Marcus had learned to channel it into motivation for continued excellence. The psychological impact of the incident had been significant for everyone involved. Marcus underwent counseling to help process the experience of using violence, even justified violence, against fellow citizens. The counseling helped him understand that his feelings of responsibility and occasional doubt were normal responses to extraordinary circumstances. He learned to view his actions not as violence but as protection, a perspective that helped him maintain his emotional balance. The 3 police officers he had protected each dealt with their own psychological aftermath. Constable Williams left active duty 6 months later, unable to shake the feeling of helplessness he had experienced during the chase. Constable Brown transferred to a training role, using his experience to better prepare other officers for similar situations. Inspector Davies remained in operational policing, but carried with him a deeper appreciation for the courage required to stand against overwhelming odds. Marcus's relationship with his girlfriend Sarah, a nurse at a London hospital, had been tested by the aftermath of the incident. The constant media attention and security concerns had put enormous strain on their relationship. However, they had worked through these challenges, and Sarah's experience dealing with crisis situations in the hospital helped her understand the pressures Marcus faced in his role. The royal family themselves had taken notice of Marcus's actions. While official protocols prevented direct communication, word filtered down through the hierarchy that his dedication and professionalism were recognized at the highest levels. This recognition carried weight within the Royal Guard that went far beyond any formal commendation or promotion. International security services began requesting Marcus for consultation on protection protocols and crisis response training. These requests represented significant professional opportunities, but they also required careful balance with his primary duties as a Royal Guard. Marcus approached these additional responsibilities with the same methodical preparation he brought to all his duties. The incident had also sparked broader discussions about the role of ceremonial forces in modern security. Academic papers were written about the balance between tradition and effectiveness, using Marcus's actions as evidence that ceremonial units could maintain their historical dignity while adapting to contemporary threats. These discussions influenced security planning for royal families and government officials worldwide. 10 years after the confrontation, Marcus was promoted to warrant officer, the highest non-commissioned rank within the Royal Guard. The promotion ceremony was attended by representatives from the Metropolitan Police, including Inspector Davies, symbolizing the enduring partnership that had grown from their shared experience during the riot. Marcus used his elevated position to establish a training exchange program between the Royal Guard and other security forces. Young guards now spent time training with police units, while police officers learned ceremonial protocols and precision from the guards. This cross-training enhanced the capabilities of both organizations and created lasting professional relationships. The legacy of that brief confrontation continued to influence Marcus's daily life and career. He had proven that individual excellence, proper training, and unwavering commitment to duty could overcome seemingly impossible odds. More importantly, he had demonstrated that such success could be achieved while maintaining honor, restraint, and respect for others, even those who posed a threat. As Marcus approached the end of his career, he often spoke to new recruits about the importance of preparation for moments they hoped would never